In this episode, we will introduce a few species of birds and butterflies at risk in Alberta. We discuss the importance of native plants and species at risk for our ecosystems. We hear from local community members involved in native plant restoration and environmental advocacy, and we'll also hear the inspiration behind the series. So let's break down some important terms that we will reference in the episode. Endangered is a term given to a species when it may soon disappear from its range or become extinct. Threatened is a term given to a species when it is likely to become endangered if certain factors are not reversed and action is not taken. Species of special concern is a term given to species with characteristics that make it sensitive to human activities or natural events. In Canada, land management is divided up between the federal and provincial governments. Generally, the government controls federal lands in the territories, national parks, and certain reserves, while on the other hand, provinces own and manage the vast majority of land within their borders, including forests, parks, and other public lands. In Canada, the Species at Risk Act, or SARA as the acronym, was passed in 2002 to protect hundreds of plants and animals from extinction, and to also help plan strategies for their recovery. The species at risk protections apply only to migratory birds, aquatic species, and species that are found on federal lands. As such, the main responsibility for protecting species at risk and their habitats in Canada lies within provincial and territorial governments. In Alberta, the Wildlife Act was established to regulate hunting. It was then amended in the early 2000s to include species at risk regulations. The province utilizes the Wildlife Act to enforce protections related to species at risk. However, many species that are listed by the Species at Risk Act are not listed in provincial at-risk legislation or wildlife laws. To this day, Alberta does not have dedicated legislation for species at risk. Overall, the Species at Risk Act is considered more robust than the Alberta Wildlife Act because it has implemented action plans for preserving listed species. While the Alberta Wildlife Act is vital for protecting species at risk, it's not free from issues or criticisms for not doing enough to protect these species and their habitats. In their article, Assessing Species at Risk Legislation Across Canadian Provinces and Territories, Gordon and other authors discuss current issues and recommendations for protecting endangered species in Canada. For example, the authors share that in Alberta, species at risk regulations are spread out across multiple acts, and decisions about which species are listed or not are not made by independent experts and are influenced by discretionary power. Discretionary power means that the authority or ability to make decisions is based on one's own judgment rather than following strict guidelines. The Alberta Wildlife Act also does not require species protection and recovery plans for listed species. Exemptions and permits can also compromise the survival of species and their habitats. Habitat protection is limited to public lands in Alberta. The authors then recommended several steps to address these issues, including establishing dedicated species at risk legislation that include all relevant species, and creating an independent committee that is responsible for assessing species at risk. They suggest that for this committee, members with scientific, Indigenous, and traditional knowledge should be appointed. Then species should be automatically designated following committee recommendations and Indigenous consultation. By establishing automatic regulations and recovery plans for the listed species, we can avoid harm to them and their critical habitats that they rely on. They also recommend limiting exemptions to activities that will not further endanger species. And finally, they suggest prioritizing Indigenous rights to manage their traditional territories and the species within them, and identifying critical habitat to protect on both public and private land by encouraging collaboration with landowners through compensation and conservation incentives. Some of the endangered birds listed under the Wildlife Act include sage grouse, piping plover, whooping crane, mountain plover, and the ferruginous hawk. Threatened birds under the Alberta Wildlife Act include the peregrine falcon, the western grabe. Special concern birds listed under the Alberta Wildlife Act include Sprague's pipit, the loggerhead shrike, long-billed curlew, black-throated green warbler, harlequin duck, white-winged scoter, prairie falcon, barred owl, and the Canada warbler. The only butterfly species recognized by the Alberta Wildlife Act as a special concern species is the Weidemeyer's admiral, found in Milk River, who used Saskatoon shrubs as its host plant. The Species at Risk Act, however, lists the monarch butterfly and half-moon hairstreak butterfly as endangered, which are both also found in Alberta. As of 2024, Alberta lists 24 species provincially and 95 species federally, representing an increase from 22 and 63 species in 2012. Protecting endangered species is vital for our local ecosystems because these species often have interconnected relationships with other species and their environments. By understanding local systems and legislations, and by encouraging critical thinking, I think we can also help advocate for these species at risk and their habitats. Next, you'll hear about my story and research experiences that helped inspire the creation of this series, Birds and Butterflies of Alberta.
Hi everyone, my name is Jasper, and I wanted to talk to you about monarch butterflies and burrowing owls. I wanted to share a little bit more of my experience. I see the world through my own experiences as a queer person with chronic illness and having a background in psychology and gender studies, I think also influences the way I approach my work, including research and field work. When I did my undergraduate degree, I studied American pika with Dr. Shannon Dickweed at MacEwan University. So I was really fortunate to be able to study American pika and go into Kananaskis, Peter Lougheed Provincial Park, where they live in the rock shambles, and record their vocalizations. And our study specifically was looking at individual identification and if they have unique voices, so to speak. So my undergraduate thesis was titled A Unique Squeak because it appeared from our analysis that they do. After that experience, it was during the pandemic, so I wasn't able to do an in-person program or necessarily work because I'm immunocompromised. So decided to take an online program in counseling psychology. And having been through trauma and being a queer person, I felt that there's not a lot of spaces for healing from trauma that feel queer affirming. Because of my own lived experiences in that area, I wanted to try to support other people as best as I could and help them work through their own healing journeys. And when I was doing that, I had a situation where my back started hurting. I went to the doctor and they found out that my spine was fractured in more than one location. So this was a huge shock for me. It was quite the, confrontation I had to make about my life and my health. And I had a lot more time to rest in bed at the time, and I was also taking this program, and I really used that as an opportunity to learn about things that were important to me and focus on my special interests, which is nature. So while I was resting, I had the opportunity to study butterflies, and I wanted to learn everything about them. Like, who are their friends? Where do they hang out with? What's their favorite food? So I became really interested in learning all about the butterflies of Alberta, and I love learning their habitat, their migration. And I was doing this online program, and I learned about monarch butterflies, and I learned that they actually have been spotted in Alberta. And I learned from that their host plant is also present in Alberta. So monarch butterflies' host plant is milkweed. And in Alberta, we have 3 native species of milkweed. So I was learning about this. I was captivated by their multi-generational migration. So monarchs that have been sighted in Alberta are part of the eastern population. And the eastern population migrates all the way from Mexico in the spring throughout the US and Canada over multiple generations. And then at the end of the season, the end of summer, they make their journey back. And that last generation of monarch butterflies lives the longest. Whereas the other live a span of a few weeks, these monarch butterflies can live 6 to 8 months. So some of those monarchs that we see that make their migration back, they're actually going to go all the way back to Mexico from Canada and overwinter in the sanctuaries there, in the sacred fir trees. As I did my research, there was a consensus that they have been sighted in Alberta, not frequently. And some people I came across said like, oh, they only come every few years, or they've only come like up to Edmonton in 2012. And there was a storm that pushed them further north. So I was interested that monarch butterflies hadn't been formally studied or surveyed here. Specifically, like milkweed surveys, mature and adult monarch surveys hadn't been, as far as I know, completed in the province. So I wrote a proposal for a research project to be able to do just that. I wanted to do a analysis and collect all the reports of monarch butterflies on citizen science platforms from the last decade. So I combined and sorted through data from eButterfly, iNaturalist, and Journey North. I got rid of any duplicate sightings, and I looked at observations where they had a photo to confirm that it was a monarch. And I wanted to ask the question, are monarch butterflies coming to Alberta every year? And based on these citizen science reports, it seems like they are. They're definitely going to southern Alberta. I combined all this data, put it onto a map to look at what that distribution looked like visually. Definitely a huge concentration in southern Alberta, which is no surprise since there's an abundance of showy milkweed. Showy milkweed is so beautiful. They're like pink fireworks, really joyful flowers, and they grow in ditches, in lots of parks in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat and all across that area. And I was also curious to learn that low milkweed, for example, grows in Edmonton. I could not believe that, I went from confronting this reality that with my chronic illnesses, there's so many barriers, and I thought it's important that I do things that are important and meaningful to me. So I wrote this proposal, found a supervisor, and I was really fortunate to be able to do these surveys for 2 summers. And a lot of it was in the hot sun, counting stems of milkweed, collecting that data, checking under the leaves for eggs and caterpillars. And what an incredible thing to come across, because they are an endangered species, and they're definitely not common. They're really rare to see in Alberta. My question was like, are they coming here every year? And yeah, of course, there was no guarantee that we would come across any, but I'm super fortunate to be able to have spotted multiple monarchs both years of the study. So I did this analysis, collecting all the data, putting it on a map, and then I was wanting to, okay, well, if they're coming here, then it's really important that we have spaces for them, that we have milkweed for them. And milkweed, when it's planted, it actually has a toxin in it that when the monarch caterpillars ingest it, they are able to turn that toxin into something that protects them from predators as an adult. I think perhaps, being a survivor of violence and having that therapy background and healing from trauma, I thought there was something really poetic and beautiful in that metaphor of, turning this poison into something that would, potentially be quite damaging, turning it into something that protects you and going through that evolution into a stronger, more resilient, evolved version of yourself. So part of my heart felt connected to monarchs for that. And of course, on their own, they're such a captivating species. There's just something so gentle about their presence, something that feels so full to see one. Part of our project was doing these surveys and, this kind of historical analysis of the reports, and also some like knowledge mobilization or making that information accessible. So we did make this monarch butterfly resource book that is finished, and all of the photos are from our research of monarchs we found in Alberta, and it talks about their migration, their life cycle, their host plants, challenges they face, their distribution, and how we can help protect them, and some other ones. And I loved illustrating this. I also wanted people to start thinking about some of the common butterflies we have here in Edmonton and their host plants. So here I've illustrated some of the butterflies and their host plants. So I was captivated by it. The more that we learn about butterflies, the more we learn about different species, the more we learn how interconnected they are to each other. So a lot of our violet species are a host plant for fritillaries. And as you start to kind of learn more, you see how it's all connected. So that was really the goal of this book, was to help people learn more about them. And here's our map that we created as well of their distribution. And I just wanted to get people hopefully inspired, thinking about different, native plants that they could plant in their garden that could be helpful to a lot of our pollinators, and to hopefully get people thinking about reducing pesticide use, because unfortunately, if pesticides are applied to milkweed, those immature monarchs won't survive. So really essential that we have natural areas in our backyards as well where we're not using pesticides that has milkweed, because if monarchs are coming here, we're definitely like the most northern part of their migration for the eastern population. Then if they're coming all the way here, we should have spaces for them.
Next, we'll hear from Patsy, who has been extremely involved in environmental advocacy, and then we will hear from Manna, the owner of Arnica Wildflowers.
Well, my name is Patsy Cottrell, and I've got a botanical background. I actually graduated in botany at the University of Liverpool. I think my interest in nature is genetic, like it is for a lot of people who are naturalists. I mean, you're just born with that interest, and as a young person, you start to, show that interest in nature. So, of course, I was very interested in biology at school, and that led on to particularly plants. I was not very good at dissecting animals, so I thought, right, zoology is not for me. And I was always good with words, and so I wanted to go into scientific editing. So I did work as an abstractor, working on agricultural abstracts for the Commonwealth Agricultural Bureau before I got married and emigrated. And once you travel the world, your interest in botany and nature just increases because you're absolutely surrounded by it. I think I was least interested in nature when I lived in a city, but even then I used to climb trees to do my homework in. And yeah, so you seek it out even if it isn't there, but it's a great stimulus. And, coming to a country like Canada, I lived in the boreal forest for 8 years. It was an absolute revelation of, different ecosystems, different aspects of nature. Yes, I mean, I made my first environmental protest at the age of 8 when my father decided to dig up a natural grassland that we had in the backyard. And I really protested against that. I asked him why he needed to do it. And he said the neighbors would think that we weren't looking after our garden properly by letting it grow wild. And I didn't win. And that's been the story of my life. I've won very few environmental protests. I think my first relationship with nature was I just found it beautiful, and not just living things, although plants particularly I find attractive, but I lived in the British countryside until I was 6. Water, I love water, seeing streams. I love the sea, the ocean. I was born very close to the East Coast. And like all kids, I was, interested in animals. I found them fascinating and cute. When I got older, of course, it became a bit more intellectual. I enjoyed the concepts of biology, found them very interesting. I was fascinated by the adaptations to the environment of living things. I can remember my biology teacher explaining why weeds, these are English European weeds, were adapted to growing in lawns, for instance. And it's just amazing to see how living creatures are adapted to their environment. And of course, now with all these media broadcasts showing animals from all over the world and plants and how they live in their environments. There's just no end really to that fascination. Yeah, I'm on the board of the Edmonton Native Plant Society. We promote the growing of native plants and the preservation of native plants. I'm a member of the Alberta Native Plant Council, which of course is a provincial organization. And I'm also on the board of SAPAR, which is Stewards of Alberta's Protected Areas Association. The protected areas, of course, are the natural areas, wildland provincial parks, and so on. And ever since I came to Edmonton in 1981 from Manitoba, I've spent a lot of time in Alberta's parks and protected areas. I did work for the government at one time and as a botany technician, and so I was involved in that way. Ever since I've been in Edmonton, I've been a member of the Wagner Natural Area Society. I was on the board for a very long time in that. I've also been involved in city conservation. In the 90s, the city of Edmonton embarked on a sort of an initiative to identify its natural areas that were in what they call the tablelands, so outside the river valley, because it was actually annexing a huge portion of land in the northeast, and it realized that some of these remnant sites were going to be lost. So it developed some policies. And I was involved in an initiative to save a place called Little Mountain Natural Area in the northeast. And that got a huge amount of media publicity. It was ultimately lost, but it did sort of serve to point out that the city's policy of saving these natural areas, which were on private land, of course, even though the land was annexed, was totally inadequate. So it led to some more funding, I suppose, and some more money. I still think the city has a very patchy reputation for actually saving its natural environment. In fact, I'm going to be talking at a public hearing on Wednesday about a proposal to relocate Fulton Creek in the southeast. So, the development continues and the loss continues. Favorite wildflower? I'd probably have to say something from Wagner Natural Area, from the Fen area there. Let's say shooting star, saline shooting star, these, pink flowers with the petals reflexed and a sort of blackish cone of stigmas. So it actually looks like a shooting star. So it's very, very aptly named. Actually, in terms of my local involvement, I am involved in Fort Saskatchewan Prairie, which is our name for it. I think it's called Interpretive Forest on the maps, and also Nisku Prairie. In terms of Fort Saskatchewan, what happened there was, while I was working for the government, Joyce Gould, who was the chief botanist there, got news from a local person from Fort Saskatchewan who was also working for the government that there was a fairly rare violet out there called prairie violet. And this was the time when the government was building up what it now calls ASIMS, its conservation database, and assigning conservation ranks. And this was considered to be fairly rare. So the local person said, I found this violet out there. So we went out there to have a look. And I was absolutely struck by how many native plants there were out there, because this is actually what's known as a glacial outwash. So it was sandy soil with a lot of south-facing slopes. So it had a lot of prairie species that are more common further. And I just thought this area is too good not to keep on visiting. Eventually, the Fort Saskatchewan Naturalist Society actually were interacting with the city to make it a definite reserve, which the city did. And we did try clearing brome and planting, and we've recently as 2023, I think we did a planting on one side. These grasslands, these remnant aspen parkland grasslands, need to be burnt and or mowed frequently to remove the litter. A lot of that litter is contributed by the brome, and to allow, delicate flowers like prairie crocus to be able to compete and get sunlight and so on. And it just isn't being done. There's no money or resources to do this. So yes, it's a bit of a losing battle, but on the other hand, it's impossible really to just abandon these places. But in terms of politics, which is where conservation, I think, really has to happen, I don't think we're making a huge amount of progress. I mean, for instance, in this last federal election, climate change is almost not featured at all. Climate change is extremely important in terms of its effect on the environment, as well as obviously on people. And if the natural environment and respect for nature could gain that sort of top of mind issue in the public, I think we would be a lot better off. And specifically in Edmonton, let City Council know how you feel about issues. And of course, to do that, you have to get involved in the issues. And I realize people don't always have the time to do that, but I think, they do have the time to make their interests known. Donate your money to the conservation organizations, Nature Canada, David Suzuki Foundation, Eco Justice, Alberta Wilderness Association, the land trusts, because they're the people who are doing, the important work. There's all kinds of local organizations, Waste Free Edmonton, and so on. There's an anti-lawn campaign. There's Edmonton Native Plant Society, and so on, that they can get involved with, planting native plants in their yards. I'm sure Mana will tell you a lot more about that.
So my name is Mana Parsian. I am the owner of Arnica Wildflowers, which is a native plant growing, Edmonton native plant growing company, and we sell Edmonton native plants in the Edmonton area. And I found that from an early age, I was captivated by the natural world, and especially the diverse array of animals, plants, and rocks, and especially wildflowers, because they are so fascinating. And when it came to choose a field to study after high school, I was torn between geology, biology, and botany. I wasn't sure which one I should pursue, and ultimately I decided to focus on geology because I would get to go outdoors. I loved being outdoors. So I studied geology, and then later I pursued a master's degree in paleontology. And paleontology is a perfect intersection between geology, botany, and biology. So it just deepened my knowledge and understanding of the natural world. And in my professional experience as an earth science planner in consulting, it further deepened my understanding of the natural world as well. And also when I did environmental assessments and I conducted surveys of soil, wildlife, vegetation, and even weeds, I learned more about the natural world. I think that humans are innately connected to nature. We are from nature. Being in nature and outdoors help us psychologically. It has a positive effect on our psyche. My most joyful moments are often spent in nature. My senses seem to be heightened, and I feel a sense of calm and clarity. I actively volunteer with the Edmonton Native Plant Society, and I'm also a member of a few environmental organizations, including Stewards of Alberta Protected Areas Association and also Alberta Native Plant Council. I believe it is important to be directly involved in conservation efforts. And my interest in local native plants began during my consulting work. Actually, when I was on site in some undisturbed areas, I was struck by the beauty and the sense of purity that these wildflowers and they possess. And they thrive without any human intervention. And this sparked a desire in me that to have them closer and in my yard, like to see them all the time. So I started volunteering with Edmonton Native Plant Society 8 years ago. And then I discovered that Edmonton Native Plant Society is the only organization that grows these native to Edmonton plants. This actually inspired me to establish my business, Arnica Wildflowers, because I want to grow Edmonton native plants and make them accessible to others who appreciate and value these plants as much as I do. And also they are aware of their benefits for our environment, for us and for our surroundings. Native plants are the foundation of life, and without them, we wouldn't have an ecosystem, because they provide the basic things that all living beings need. So it is really important that we actually keep the ones that we have as much as we can and prevent destruction of environment, and also plant more native plants. I find beauty and purity in all of our local flora, from the intricate details of their seeds to their mature forms and vibrant blooms. Prairie crocus, three-flowered avens, wild blue flax, giant hyssop, wild bergamot or native bee balm, as well as goldenrods, asters, and sunflowers. And these three latter are the keystone species. These three they play a vital role in feeding native insects and pollinators. If I have to choose a favorite one, it would be wild bergamot or bee balm, native bee balm. And this is such an extraordinary plant because wildlife use it. The hummingbirds use the nectar. Bees, butterflies are attracted to it, and it is a host for a few different species, as well as medicinal properties that this plant has.
Native plants are perennials, meaning they can come back every year. Mana shares with us how native plants survive the winter and shares some tips for starting your own native plants in your garden, as well as how to start low milkweed.
We should remember that our climate is really harsh, really long winters. We have to have many ways of dealing with the cold and edible. So these plants have to have some ways of surviving. And one of the methods is that they have deep roots. So they have to develop these deep roots over a period of time. It cannot just be a few months, just like an annual plant that you plant it and then after, a week you see that it gets really tall and big, just like tomatoes, peppers, and all of that. So they have to develop their roots, really go deep and rely on the ground rather than the outside elements. And so the time that they take, they have to do all of those developing, and it just takes long. And majority of them do not flower until the second year and some third year. And for example, Western wood lily is one of those plants that flowers after 5 years. If you are lucky, after 5th year, it flowers. Otherwise, after 7th years. And when we see these flowers in the ditches along the road, we never think that they have to work that hard, and eventually, our reward is looking at that beautiful orange color that Western wood lily has. But we don't know how much that plant had to work on it and really, really make sure that eventually it blooms. The first thing is start small, and you have to gather patience from anywhere you can, from the air, from the ground, from your neighbors, from your friends. Patience, patience, patience. But then start small. Just designate a small area, and it doesn't matter if it's shade, if it's sun, or it's semi-shade location in your yard. Just designate that part and make sure that you get rid of everything that you have right now. Non-native plants, lawn, whatever, rocks, whatever it is. Just clear that out. Make sure that you get rid of all of the roots of whatever is in there, and start with a clean slate and get a few species. And of course, you have to pay attention to the characteristics of those plants, because some of them, they like to be in a sunny, hot location. Some, they like it a little bit cooler and some sun and some shade. And some of them, they like to be in a shaded location. And if you put them in a sunny spot, they wouldn't grow. So they have to be sited properly. You do want to have a patch. And the other thing is that plants grow better together when they are close to each other of the same species, because some of them, they are allelopathic and they change the chemistry of the soil to their liking. So you always get a better result when you have patches of plants. I get a lot of birds in my yard. 4 species of warblers. And you know that warblers are insect eaters. They don't care about our feeders that a lot of people really excited to fill them up and get the birds come to their yard. All of those insects are actually the food that we can provide for our birds, especially the native birds. Most times, actually, they come for the insects and the seeds as well. You know, seeds of giant hyssop have been eaten by white-throated sparrows, pine siskins, and juncos, that they come to the garden, especially in the fall, before their migration, because they have to fill up their stomach and then be strong for their long trip south. Yeah, so there are many fascinating things that happen with between interactions between the insects and then the birds. And if you want a healthy garden, you want a healthy environment, you do not need to use any chemicals. All of those insects actually like a chain, they keep each other in check, and you will end up enjoying your yard and also helping the environment. Non-native plants, they need a lot of maintenance. They need a lot of water, fertilizing, using different chemicals. But native ones, they do not need any of those things. And also, do not worry about seeing insects on your native plants. Actually, it makes me thrilled and so happy when I see those red aphids on my goldenrods, because those are actually the food for the warblers. So I know that they come. We planted some plants in a few planters in front of McEwen University. And that was like an experiment with using native plants in containers and planters. And I got contacted that there are a lot of aphids, and I said, do not worry, it'll be resolved by itself. And sure enough, I was told later that they had many ladybugs, and in a few days, they were all gone. Low milkweed is one of those ones that is really slow growing and picky and sensitive to grow. So do not get discouraged. Still, you can still try, and you just have to do it over and over, and eventually you get it. So it needs to be stratified. Cold stratification is the way for starting the germination. Then a lot of them, they do germinate. You see the tiny shoots, and then rather than planting them in pots, put them in peat pellets or peat pots. And the reason is that their roots are really sensitive. So when you put them in peat pots, it's just one individual unit that you have, and then you can actually plant that one in a bigger pot or put it in the garden. And when you plant it after maybe a month or so, you do not see the plant at all, because it looks like that it's dead, but it's not. Underground is alive, and you have to wait another year for it to come back, and a late comeback, that's for sure, but it'll come back. But it has to establish itself, develop all of those deep roots, take hold in your yard, and eventually you have it. And then it'll be extremely rewarding when you see a monarch butterfly. Other insects also use low milkweed. I have taken photos of the swallowtail butterfly, tiger swallowtail butterfly, and other ones, and also some bees and some flies that they use. Other insects use low milkweed too, but the caterpillars of monarch butterfly only eat milkweed. Make sure you get local seeds. And for example, for arnica wildflowers, we do not grow anything outside the 30-kilometer zone. Easy to grow, probably I would suggest giant hyssop, because it's a bee magnet, and also it attracts birds. They eat the seeds. It is edible. And one thing I should tell you about the native plants is that the seeds of native plants, contrary to the seeds that we purchase to grow plants, they have not been treated with chemicals and neonicotinoids, because those ones are treated to avoid being eaten by insects. And those chemicals actually stay in the plant. They go to the leaves, they go to the berries, they go to the fruit and all of that. And we are consuming those ones. But native plants, the seeds are clean. So whatever you get in your yard, it's as organic and as pure it can be. So when you eat that, you are avoiding all of those chemicals that make us sick at the end. Dry hyssop does not need a lot of maintenance or anything like that. We have two species of strawberry in the Edmonton area. One is the wild strawberry or field strawberry, which is good for semi-shade to sun locations, and woodland strawberry is good for full shade to semi-shade. They flower early. They have flowers in my yard right now, and they are good for pollinators that they emerge early. I wish they knew some of the myriad benefits that native plants have. Just to name a few. First off, they are the foundation of life on Earth. Without them, life does not exist as we know. And they are perennial, majority of them. And when you plant a perennial, it saves you a lot of funding. And the other benefit is they are drought tolerant. It's because they have deep roots. So they get the moisture from the ground, and you can save on your water bill as well. They are low maintenance. No garden is no maintenance. You still have to tend to your garden, but they do not take as much time and caring as non-native plants have. You do not need to use any fertilizers, any pesticides, any type of chemicals. So the environment around you, the soil, the water, the air becomes clean. A lot of these plants have been medicine for indigenous people for many, many years. They have used them, sweetgrass, sage, all of that. So you can use them that way. So they are perennial, they come back, and they are clean and nice. They provide a lot of ecological services to our environment. They clean the air, and also they prevent erosion. A lot of native plants, because of their deep roots, you plant them on a slope and they prevent the erosion. They prevent floods, because when you get rid of your native plants, there is nothing to hold the soil together. So then erosion happens and floods happen. And also wildfire happen. So they are in many ways are better to be planted rather than those annuals that we purchase. Although I know that our nature is that we want something showy, but I assure you that native plants are amazingly beautiful. When you have them, then you see the beauty in color and you see their beauty in different ways. Yes, I get emotional. Prior to start this business was providing access to native plants for other people that they are passionate about them, they value them, and they appreciate them. So I think the most important part of our responsibilities is providing those plants. So that's what we are doing, and we at the Collingwood Farmers Market during the growing seasons every Sunday. If people have questions or they want to order plants or anything about Edmonton native plants, we try to be available for that. And here and there, I do some presentations to when I'm asked, and I do have time to actually explain about my personal experiences with native plants, with Edmonton native plants. And we are going to keep our business just to Edmonton native plants because I see the value in having those plants as local as they can be. Because as you know, just like people, plants are, they have different genes. Even we call them, the native bee balm or wild bergamot. The scientific name is monarch fistulosa, and it exists in many different parts of North America. But the plant that grows in Edmonton naturally in a natural setting, its genes is different from the genes of monarch fistulosa in Calgary, from monarch fistulosa in Toronto, or in the US. So as they are different and they have different genes, their tolerance, their strengths, their ability to deal with the different climates are different. So we at Arnica Wildflowers, we are holding this true to ourselves that we just grow Edmonton native plants We try to provide as many plants as we can, native plants during the season. And we do get bigger orders for reclamation sites, for schools, but mainly people in the city that they want those plants. We try to actually fulfill their orders and give them what they want and explain it as much as we can. And we are on Instagram and Facebook. You can see the list of plants that we take to the farmers market. We just grow native to Edmonton, not Alberta, because we want people to get the true native to Edmonton plants, and they survive. You don't need to do any extra work, and they become really beautiful hosts for all of native to Edmonton insects.
Next, I'll share a little bit more about what inspired me to create the series.
Another situation that I mentioned in the Swallows of Alberta episode was doing the breeding bird survey internship at Beaver Hill Bird Observatory. It was also one where I was confronting my health. There was a lot going on with my health and body that was out of my control. And there was no reason for my spine fractures. It seems that the required meds that I have to take for my heart seem to be affecting my bone density. The number one thing that was recommended was be active. So how wonderful that I had this opportunity to do these surveys. I'm fortunate that they hired me on to help with owl banding. Anyone who has chronic pain can know how challenging it can be. But I felt really motivated by this passion for conservation and environmental monitoring. And that's what inspired this documentary series, was doing environmental monitoring there. I grew up near the Beaver Hill Bird Observatory, so it's always been a really special place to it was amazing. It was such a turning point for my life to have to confront certain things about my chronic illness and disability. Led me to lean more into my special interests and what I was so passionate about. So while I did the owl banding there, it was a wonderful experience, and I loved connecting with the public. And in the winter, we take the education birds into the classrooms and teach about bird conservation. So I got to work closely with Nina the burrowing owl, and people love Nina. And it was amazing. Maybe my first or second week of doing the presentations, I was so nervous, but I went out after one of my presentations with some teenagers. One of the students came up to me after, and they gave me this drawing, and you can see that they drew Nina the burrowing owl. So just being able to make that difference led to this idea where I want to inspire people to connect with nature. I want people to learn more about birds and butterflies that live here. And I like to think that we can plant the seeds of curiosity or interest. Who knows the impact of how much that will grow and inspire curiosity with the natural world around us, and doing our best to conserve it. Being able to share the burrowing owl conservation story specifically as another endangered species here in Alberta was important to me. And it's amazing because both burrowing owls and monarch butterflies migrate to Mexico, and some burrowing owls migrate to the States. And how incredible that an insect who weighs less than a paperclip can make that journey from Canada to Mexico. How incredible that a little owl, roughly the size of a pop can make that journey to Mexico. And they're really these species that are easy for people to become interested in. They're beautiful, they're adorable. Sometimes they see their personality shine through a little bit, and that helps people connect to it. I think it can teach people a lot about why protecting our grassland areas is so important. Because when we're looking at the life of one of these animals, every part of their migration matters. So every safe place that they can access in natural areas and habitats is vital.
Burrowing owls live in burrows in the ground. They arrive in Alberta in April and return to their wintering grounds in September. They nest in open areas with available burrows, surrounded by a combination of short and tall grasses. They don't dig their own burrows. Instead, they take over burrows created by Richardson's ground squirrels, prairie dogs, foxes, coyotes, and badgers. Burrowing owls eat voles, grasshoppers, and many other insects. A family of burrowing owls can consume up to 7,000 insects and 1,800 rodents in one season. Burrowing owls also decorate their burrows. Unfortunately, the cultivation of grasslands for agriculture and human expansion destroys burrows and reduces burrowing owl hunting territory. Fewer of these species means that burrowing owls have trouble finding enough food to survive. Next, Jeff shares about the challenges burrowing owls are facing in Alberta.
Really cool to do research on burrowing owls, to be able to study them in southern Alberta and Saskatchewan and find out more about their ecology and what the problems were. And initially the thought was that the problem was in Mexico. And we were able to, after 10 years of research in Mexico, show that really the birds are doing just fine in Mexico. The problem is in Canada with them not producing enough young. And then the reason they don't come back, the reason researchers thought there was a problem in the winter, is they disperse from year to year. So they simply fly back and stop in the US. They just don't all come north because the populations in the US are declining. There's vacant habitat there. So we simply lose about 20% of our owls, in quotes, our owls, every year because they short stop into the US. So until their population increases and their habitat's full, the extra birds are not going to keep coming north. Only a few will come north every year. The reason the burrowing owls can't provide enough food is we totally changed the ecology of the prairies. So when a bird has 9 eggs and 8 young and is helpless, so if a duck does that, the ducklings feed for themselves. The female just watches out for predators. When birds are born in a nest and they're helpless, they have to be fed. The females underground, keeping them warm because it tends to still be cold in May, early June underground. The male's job then is to find enough food for himself, for the female, and the 8 nestlings that hatched. So food has to be super abundant. It's got to be something easy to get. There used to be a large locust on the Canadian prairies and the US prairies, North American prairies, and the locust was in huge swarms like we see pictures of periodically in Africa and Asia. And that would have been a bonanza of food for a burrowing owl. So he'd simply walk outside, grab some grasshoppers, some locusts, and feed the female, job done. And an hour later, grab these were big grasshoppers, 4 inches long, so they'd actually be able to tear them up and feed several young with one grasshopper. Those are extinct. They're simply gone. We've chopped up the prairies, so the outbreaks of smaller grasshoppers that do occur are now less frequent, they're less intense, and they cover a smaller geographic area. So we've really broken up the prairies such that grasshopper infestations don't happen the way they did historically. And likewise for mice and voles, they used to be much more widespread. But if you can imagine, during bad years, there's a flicker. See it on the railing?
Yes, I do.
The remaining prairies now are just little patches. So in the fluctuating ecology of the prairies, when there's a dip in numbers, that patch could end up with no mice at all. So that when there's good conditions for mice or voles, there's simply no small population to preserve, right? Because we've chopped it up. We've also cultivated the best soils on the prairies, the Chernozyms. That's where our wheat are grown and our other crops. And we've left behind the solonexic soils, the coarse gravelly soils. The rangeland that's there now isn't as productive. So we've taken the best soils, the most productive areas, eliminated them as places for food for burrowing owls and other prairie birds. And we've left behind the least productive soils, least productive habitat, and chopped it, for the most part, into small pieces. So there isn't a population that can repopulate, like a population of prey that can repopulate and become super abundant. So consequently, the strategy of a burrowing owl of being able to have 8 young, and if it's a good year for food, produce 8 fledglings. And if it's a bad year, then they won't, but they'd have good years and bad years. Now they're just having bad years year after year after year. And over millennium, the species is not faithful to their breeding site. So they tend to fly north and simply occupy suitable habitat as they come north. So we end up at the north end of their range with fewer birds coming back and more of them short stopping. So we take a double whammy in terms of population declines, fewer fledglings and fewer returning birds.
To help address these issues, researchers will breed burrowing owls in captivity and release them as a way to boost population numbers. Researchers will also help with supplemental feeding or providing food, usually mice, to owl nests during the nesting season to help increase their success. In the wild, burrowing owlets have less than a 2 to 3% chance of survival. The Wilder Institute in Calgary, Alberta, through their Head Start program, has been capturing baby burrowing owls, raising them in captivity, and then releasing them as breeding pairs with artificial burrows in the wild with supplemented food. In May 2023, they celebrated the release of their 100th burrowing owl back into the wild. So far, they've had an 80% success rate, with pairs producing 5 to 6 more owlets in the wild. You can help by donating to organizations that are supporting grassland conservation efforts. Next, Young shares about another grassland species at risk in Alberta.
My favorite bird is the loggerhead shrike. It is just such a cool bird. There's just something about a songbird that acts like a bird of prey that I just think is so neat and cool. And specifically the loggerhead shrike, because it is such an important bird for our grasslands, our beautiful prairies, and they're just so charming. I just find them so cute with their little black masks, and just how they act, right? They hunt other creatures, but they don't have the really strong talent. So the whole impaling things and even utilizing, not just tree branches, but things that humans have put in place, like barbed wire fences, I think is just so cool, so innovative. And it's hard just not to feel very charmed by how they act and how cute they are, while also just being so vicious to everything else. And yeah, there's something about them that just really draws me in. I just really like them.
Next, we'll discuss the incredible migration of the monarch butterfly.
So I thought, why don't we follow their journey? Why don't we show people these amazing species? And you'll see that we go on the journey to the overwintering grounds in Mexico. And you can see how for us, we have to get on a plane and we have to hike up a mountain. But for these creatures, they can make that journey on their own. And they're facing more and more threats with climate change and with less habitat being available. So now more than ever, it's important that we learn about them and understand them. Going to Mexico was an incredible experience. I'm so grateful that I'm able to share that journey with you, and I hope you can imagine, for us, it is quite the journey, and the fact that these little critters are able to make that journey is even more captivating. So I hope you feel a little bit inspired by their story and you can see their journey. And for me, there was nothing more emotional than seeing the monarch butterflies in their overwintering grounds. When you hike up the mountain, it's quite the journey up, and when you're up there, you're not allowed to speak where they are, and they limit the amount of time to reduce the disturbance on the butterflies. And when I got up there, it was just the most beautiful scene I've ever witnessed. Seeing that many monarch butterflies, seeing them cover the tree, it looks like bark, and seeing them fly together. It was so beautiful. I was so touched emotionally that I cried. And to know that potentially one of those monarchs that we encountered in the summer in our research could be among this huge group of monarchs is awe-inspiring. And I think that it's such a beautiful thing, and I so wish that everyone could witness it. And I think if you do, you can realize how important it is to protect it. And one of our guides, I'm so grateful for her, she shared that on one of their surveys, they were teaching the group about how pesticides affect monarch butterflies, and there was apparently a farmer they had brought on this tour, and apparently he had a bit of a grumpy disposition, but then when he was up there seeing all the monarchs, apparently he stopped, and she could see how overwhelmed by emotion he was. He told her afterwards that he would never use pesticides again. And I think that that story can kind of shine a light on, if people are connecting with nature, they're going to realize why it's important we protect it. And for me, the purpose that really drove me forward in this, I think it's so important for future generations to be able to witness these species. So we need to do everything we can to help protect them, to make that possible. So I hope this series helped you learn a bit more about monarch butterflies and burrowing owls in that episode, but as well, I hope that maybe people after watching this will be curious about what they see in their backyards and know that no matter how small, we can all play a part in conservation.